Thanks for joining us for Friday Fuel for March 25th, 2022. We hope you can join us Sunday night for a delicious Sunday supper, time to gather and enjoy some fellowship, and a bit of a spa night afterward. Next week, we continue our look into the minor prophets for a couple of more weeks before we get to Holy Week, and we talk about the seasons of the church year. So join us on Wednesday nights at 8:30. And of course, we'll be back here every Friday. You can find Friday Fuel by 3:30 p.m. on our YouTube channel. And if you'd like to know more about what we're doing, email Betsy, B-E-T-Z-Y, at eiuwesley.org, and you can be added to our weekly email list and learn about all our upcoming events. Thanks for joining us, and here's some Friday Fuel. We've made it to Friday once again, so here's Friday Fuel. Recently on Wednesday nights, we've been talking about the minor prophets, and this Wednesday we read through the book of Jonah, which is a short book. I mean, all the minor prophets are, that's part of why they're called minor. But we had a question from Jonah 1, verse 7. So Jonah has decided to flee from God and not go to Nineveh, right? So then he goes the opposite direction, gets on a ship, there's a storm, and the sailors have called out to their gods, like each to his own god. Jonah's asleep in the bottom of the ship for some reason. So the captain comes and is like, yo, get up. And then verse 7 says, meanwhile, the sailors said to each other, come on, let's cast lots so that we might learn who is to blame for this evil that's happening to us. They cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. So they said to him, tell us, since you're the cause of this evil happening to us, what do you do, and where are you from? What's your country, and of what people are you? He said to them, I'm a Hebrew. I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land. The men were terrified and said to him, what have you done? The men knew that Jonah was fleeing from the Lord because he had told them. They said to him, what will we do about you so that the sea will become calm around us? The sea was continuing to rage. He said to them, pick me up and hurl me into the sea. Then the sea will become calm around you. I know it's my fault that this great storm has come upon you. So eventually they try some other methods, but they throw him overboard and the storm is over. And of course, Jonah ends up being swallowed by a fish, and the story goes on. And there's a lot that's interesting about the story of Jonah because it's not really as nice as we make it in children's books. Jonah actually is kind of a turkey and doesn't want to do what God tells him to do. Obviously, first he flees, but then he ends up in a fish, and then he's still he's stuck at Nineveh, but he doesn't want to be there, and he complains, and God's like, you know what? It's my prerogative if I want to care for these people, because I care for you too. Anyway, so the question that we had though was, what does it mean to cast lots? And this is really an interesting topic, which I'm not, we could talk about a lot probably, but the New Interpreter's Bible Commentary mentions for this verse, sorry, my table rotates, which is sometimes helpful and not sometimes helpful. So the New Interpreter's Bible Commentary on Jonah says about these verses, although nowhere does the Bible report the exact procedure for casting lots, the technique was familiar in the ancient Near East. Perhaps from among a collection of shards, each inscribed with the name of a member of the ship, the sailors choose one. The narrator then reports the result in a sentence whose climactic phrase lays in stress on Jonah. Theologically, the use of lots to disclose the truth elevates chance to the level of divine will. The story does not report that Yahweh or any other deity directed the outcome of the exercise, but simply that the sailors cast lots and the lot fell on Jonah. In a setting of violence, chance alone provides the way to resolve the conflict, but the chance is caused. So, that's one discussion. So the idea of casting lots was common, not just for the Israelites, but in all cultures as sort of a way of making decisions. And it was sort of like we say, toss the dice and take a chance. That's very similar to what it was, we think. But we don't know for sure. And so as we think about that and how interesting that is, that we might consider what that says about how we believe that God works and how the Israelites believe that God works. I got out my Old Testament textbooks, and maybe I'll save one of them for a different day. When we talk more, we should maybe define what a prophet is. That might have been a good thing to start with. But this one is called The Old Testament, A Historical and Literary Introduction to the Hebrew Scriptures by Michael D. Coogan. I've always thought it was a great book. Very interesting when I had to read it in seminary, but also tells us something helpful about casting lots and what that meant to the Israelites. So not only was it a custom of other people, these sailors were not Israelites and they knew the custom of casting lots, but the people of Israel took it. It's actually in scripture, is a description of like the priestly garments that involved a pouch to hold the Urim and the Thummim, which are what they used to cast lots. So the people of Israel took this custom, and it was kind of codified as part of the priest's duties sometimes to do this. And so we have this interesting relationship between, prophecy, which we think of as somebody saying something, but also divination, a way of finding out God's will in different forms. And so Coogan tells us, in one of the most widely attested forms of divination in ancient Israel, lots were cast, or sacred objects such as the Urim and Thummim and the ephod were employed to give answers to questions that could be answered by either yes or no. This type of divination was used to decide on a course of action, to choose a leader, and to determine a guilty party when the material evidence was inclusive. In all of these cases, the result was considered to be from God. The Urim and Thummim and the ephod with which they were connected formed part of the vestments of the priests. These objects are not fully understood. The Urim and Thummim were apparently thrown like dice. Their connection with the priesthood is significant, although also not entirely clear. So we have to keep in mind, we're really not sure how this worked, but it was a way that they believed that they, understood the gods, whichever gods they were worshiping, depending on where they were from or what nationality they were, but that they could understand God's will better by tossing these dice. And so the priests got to do that sometimes. And then there were also other ways that priests and Israelites in general practiced finding the will of God in ways that we might think are magic, but they did not think, it's very careful about no magic. But they had this understanding of these signs and these activities that we might say were magic, that they weren't if they were somehow directed by the Lord. So, it is interesting to think about and brings you a lot of questions. And there were people in the Old Testament who got in a lot of trouble for practicing divination the wrong way. Maybe most importantly, when Saul found, we sometimes refer to the witch of Endor, or a medium who could consult the dead, and he actually got in pretty big trouble for that. But sometimes that, there were mediums, there were people who specialized in that, just like there were also prophets. So something a little different for your Friday fuel, just something to think about. There's some really interesting stuff in this little old book here. The cultures that these stories come from are so different from ours, and yet always teach us more about who God is and how God relates to us and we relate to God. So we might have a lot of questions and wonder a lot of things, but we also can learn from them. So take a look at the book of Jonah if you haven't recently, and if you weren't with us on Wednesday night, and see where you can see the story being told, and where there's exaggeration, and where there's a point being made in a storytelling kind of way, not just in, oh, this is the Bible, but the people who are telling the story of Jonah are making some really interesting points about who's an insider and who's an outsider, and how insiders and outsiders should relate to God and should understand what God is saying, as well as we're learning some cultural things about casting lots. So I hope that's at least a little bit interesting to you, and we will be back here next week with more interesting questions about the Bible for Friday Fool. Have a great week. Bye.